They didn't hurt you the way you expected to be hurt. There was no screaming, no slammed doors, no moment where the air in the room changed and you knew that. That is when it started. It was quieter than that. It always is. It felt like being loved. And that is exactly what made it so dangerous. There is a type of person that psychology is only now beginning to take seriously. Not because they're rare, but because they are so convincing, so genuinely warm, so emotionally perceptive, that even the people studying human behavior missed them for years. They are not the cold manipulator you were warned about. They are not the emotionally unavailable person your therapist described. They feel deeply, sometimes too deeply. They cry at the right moments. They remember the small things. They say the exact sentence you needed to hear at the exact moment you needed to hear it. And yet, something was always slightly wrong. You could never name it. That was the point. What you were dealing with, what you may still be processing without fully understanding it, sits at the intersection of two things we never thought could coexist: deep emotional sensitivity and a quiet, unconscious darkness. A darkness so well dressed in warmth that it took you months, maybe years, to even consider that it was there. The 7 signs I'm about to show you are not obvious. They were never meant to be, but once you see them, you will not be able to unsee them. And more importantly, you will finally understand why what happened to you made no sense. Until now. The first sign is this: they understood you faster than anyone ever had. And that speed, that impossible, intoxicating speed of being known, is exactly what you should have questioned. But you didn't, none of us do, because genuine understanding is one of the rarest things a human being can experience. We spend entire lifetimes searching for one person who truly sees us. So when someone appears, seemingly out of nowhere, and reflects your inner world back to you with stunning accuracy, your nervous system doesn't raise an alarm. It exhales. It says, finally. But here's what was actually happening in those early conversations. While you were feeling seen, they were building a map. Every vulnerability you shared, every fear you named, every wound you accidentally revealed was being quietly filed. Not with malice, not with a conscious plan, but with an instinct so deeply trained it had become invisible even to them. The dark empath doesn't just feel your emotions. They harvest them, warmly, carefully, with what feels like genuine care. And the most disturbing part is, the care is often real. That's what separates them from the pure narcissist. The dark empath can simultaneously care about you and use what they know about you for their own emotional survival. Both things are true at once. And that contradiction, that impossible coexistence of warmth and weaponization, is the reason you are still confused about what happened. The second sign is harder to see because it hides inside something that looks like love. Watch what happens when you grow, when you find clarity, when you make a decision that moves you forward alone, independently, without needing them. Something shifts. It's subtle. A tone change. A withdrawal of warmth so slight you almost convince yourself you imagined it. Or maybe it's the opposite, a sudden emotional intensity, a crisis, a vulnerability release so perfectly timed that your attention is redirected before your independence can fully form. Dark empaths have an almost unconscious sensitivity to shifts in emotional power. When they sense you pulling toward yourself, toward your own life, your own certainty, something inside them responds. Not because they are evil, but because your independence represents a threat their nervous system was never taught to tolerate. This pattern has a name in psychology. It's called the cycle of idealization and destabilization. First, they elevate you to a height that only they can reach you at. Then slowly they begin to erode the ground beneath your feet, not with cruelty, but with subtle doubt, soft concern, ambiguous comments that lodge in your mind like splinters. "You're so sensitive. I just worry about how people take advantage of that," said softly. Said with the face of someone who loves you, and you spend the next 3 days wondering if they're right. That is not an accident. That is architecture. Now I need you to stay with me for the third sign, because this is where everything starts to make a different kind of sense. The dark empath was almost certainly a child who had no choice but to become this way. Imagine growing up in a house where love was not a constant, where it arrived and disappeared based on someone else's mood, where you learned, before you had the language to describe it, that the safest thing you could do was to read the room before entering it. Watch the adult's face, scan their tone, adjust yourself accordingly. Disappear when you need to disappear. Become whatever is required in this moment, because your emotional survival depends on getting this right. This is called hypervigilance, and in a child, It looks like a gift. Adults call this child perceptive, mature, old soul. Nobody sees the fear underneath. Nobody sees the child who is working constantly, scanning, calculating, adjusting, just to feel safe in their own home. And here's the wound that nobody talks about. That child grows up believing, in the deepest and most wordless way, that they do not have inherent worth. That worth is something you perform, something you earn by being useful, by being emotionally intelligent, by reading people correctly and giving them what they need before they even ask. That child becomes an adult who is extraordinarily good at intimacy and extraordinarily afraid of it, who gives deeply and keeps score without meaning to, who connects genuinely and cannot stop themselves from using that connection as a lifeline to something they are terrified of losing. The dark empath did not choose this. It was chosen for them, long before they were old enough to understand what was happening. And this does not mean you should stay. It does not mean the harm they caused is erased. But it means the story is more tragic than you thought. The fourth sign shows up in silences, not in what they say, in what they never say. Healthy emotional relationships have a quality of mutuality. You are vulnerable, they are vulnerable. You share your fear, they share theirs. The emotional labor moves in both directions, roughly, imperfectly, but genuinely. With the dark empath, there is a specific asymmetry you will feel before you can name it. You know everything about their pain, their childhood, their fears, the ways they've been hurt. You could describe their wounds in detail, the parent who left, the friendship that shattered, the version of themselves they lost somewhere along the way. But when you sit quietly and try to locate yourself in their inner world, when you search for evidence that they have thought about your needs, your fears, your becoming, without being prompted, you find something that unsettles you, not emptiness, something more disorienting than emptiness. You find yourself only as they need you to be, a mirror, not a person, a function, not a soul. They know your map, but they have never handed you theirs, not really, not without it costing you something first. And the moments when they do, the vulnerable disclosures, the raw admissions, notice the timing. Notice how often these moments arrive precisely when you have reached a place of clarity or independence. Notice how the conversation always, somehow, finds its way back to them. That is not coincidence. It is pattern, and patterns do not lie. The fifth sign is the one that stays with you longest after they are gone. You stop trusting yourself, not all at once. It happened the way water shapes stone, slowly, through repetition, through sustained contact with something harder than you expected. You began to doubt your own perception, your own feelings. You started explaining your pain in smaller and smaller doses, as though apology had become the grammar of your emotional language. You found yourself wondering whether you were too much, whether what you felt was real, or whether you were simply, as they sometimes gently suggested, too sensitive to see things clearly. This is the deepest wound the dark empath leaves. Not a single event, not a dramatic betrayal, but the quiet, accumulated erosion of your ability to trust your own inner knowing. Psychology calls this relational trauma, the kind that doesn't come from one explosion, but from 1,000 small moments, each one individually deniable, together devastating. No single moment holds up as evidence. The damage is atmospheric. It lives in the air of who you became while you were with them. And the reason it's so hard to heal from is this: ordinary healing tools were not designed for this kind of wound. You try to describe what happened, and the words feel too small, too dramatic, or not dramatic enough. There is no single scene you can point to. There is only the person you were before, and the quieter, more uncertain person you became. The sixth sign is what happens when you try to leave, or what happened. If you've been there, you already know what I'm about to say. With an ordinary manipulative person, the response to your departure is predictable. Coldness, anger, sometimes threats. With the dark empath, it is the most emotionally overwhelming experience you have ever had with them. Suddenly, they see you, fully, completely, in the way you had been waiting for them to see you for months. Suddenly, the walls come down. Suddenly, they are saying everything you needed to hear, validating every concern, acknowledging every wound, showing a vulnerability so raw and real that you feel certain this time is different. And here is the devastating truth: it is real. The vulnerability they are releasing in that moment is genuine. The dark empath is not performing emotion they don't have. They are accessing it and releasing it because some part of them understands, without conscious awareness, that this is the moment that requires it. That is not manipulation in the way we usually imagine it. Cold, calculated, cynical. It is something more complicated, more tragic. a person using their most real pain as an instrument of survival without fully knowing that's what they're doing. And you, because you feel deeply, because you can recognize genuine pain, you responded to it, you went back, or you almost did. That is not weakness. That is empathy being used against empathy. The seventh sign is the one nobody talks about, because it requires us to turn the mirror slightly toward ourselves. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the person watching this video is not only the one who was hurt. Sometimes you are watching because something in this has felt uncomfortably familiar, not because of what was done to you, but because of patterns you have noticed in yourself. The way you sometimes feel, read, collect. The way your care for people and your need from people have become tangled in ways you don't fully understand. If that is you, I need you to hear this clearly. Recognizing these patterns in yourself does not make you a monster. It makes you someone who is finally seeing clearly. Someone who grew up learning that love was a transaction and who has been running that software ever since. Not because you are cruel, but because nobody ever showed you another way. The dark empath is not beyond healing. They are not a fixed category. They are a person carrying a wound so old they've mistaken it for personality. And the first act of healing is always the same. It is the terrifying, necessary act of seeing yourself honestly, without defensiveness, without rushing to self-forgiveness before the seeing is complete. You have to look at it, all of it, and then, and only then, you can begin to choose differently. Here is where we arrive. Whether you came here because of someone who hurt you, or because something in this script held up a mirror, the path forward carries the same first step. Stop calling what happened to you a mystery. It was a pattern. Patterns have origins. Origins can be understood. And understanding, real understanding, not the kind that excuses but the kind that explains, is the beginning of freedom. You were not naive. You were not foolish. You were a person with a deep capacity for love who encountered someone whose capacity for love had been damaged and distorted by things that happened long before you arrived. Your sensitivity was never the problem. It was always your greatest strength. It was simply placed in proximity to something that did not know how to honor it. And now, going forward, you get to do something that the dark empath may never be able to do. You get to choose. You can choose relationships that do not require you to doubt yourself in order to maintain them. You can choose to trust the quiet knowing inside you that rises when something is wrong. You can choose to be deeply feeling and deeply discerning at the same time, not one at the expense of the other. Healing from this is not about becoming harder. It is not about closing. It is about becoming so grounded in your own truth that confusion cannot take root the way it once did. The dark empath will always be able to read a room, but you are learning to read yourself. And once you can do that truly, honestly, without flinching, no one will ever be able to use your own heart against you again.